In the world of Game of Thrones, and by extension A Song of Ice and Fire, there is one quote that stands out in the minds of fans.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.
This line, spoken by Ramsay Bolton in the TV show, has come to represent how many people view the series. A brutal, bleak story where hope seems futile, our heroes are hidden villains, and nothing matters. Fans and reviewers alike often use this line to explain away the disappointing, anticlimactic, and downright bad ending of the show, and some still cling to it today. On top of that, they project the same ideas from the show onto the book series. Yes, A Song of Ice and Fire is full of violence, betrayal, and heartbreak, but to reduce it to this cynical, hopeless, nihilistic worldview is unfair. The show always leans into shock value and nihilistic ideologies, but George Martin does not. A Song of Ice and Fire isn't a nihilistic series about the inevitability of death and corruption. It's not a tale where everything is pointless, where the characters who once embodied hope or idealism are reduced to tragic figures. It's certainly not a story that will end this hollow. The show had a terrible ending because it stayed so far from the themes that Martin's work is truly about. That ending is not George's ending, and Ramsay Bolton's remark was never meant to sum up the series. At its core, A Song of Ice and Fire is a very romantic story. Romantic in the literary sense, deeply concerned with the importance of love, compassion, and the struggle for meaning in an often cruel world. Martin himself had made this clear. Do you think the world of Ice and Fire is a pessimistic world? Where you get caught up in struggles and you can overcome them? Is winter coming, or is there actually hope? In a very basic level, winter is coming for all of us. I think that's one of the things that art is concerned with. The awareness of our own mortality. Valar Morghulis, all men must die. That sorrow lies over our world and will until medical science give us all immortality, but I don't think it makes it necessarily a pessimistic world. Not any more pessimistic than the real world we live in. We are here for a short time and we should be conscious of our own mortality. But the important thing is that love, compassion and empathy with other human beings is still possible. Laughter is still possible, even laughter in the face of death. The struggle to make the world a better place. We have things like war, murder and rape, horrible things that still exist, but we don't have to accept them, we can fight the good fight. The fight to eliminate those things. There is darkness in the world, but I don't think we necessarily need to give way to despair. One of the great things that Tolkien says in Lord of the Rings is despair is the ultimate crime. That's the ultimate failing of Denethor, the steward of Gondor. That he despairs of ever being able to defeat Sauron. We should not despair. We should not go gently into that good night. So winter is coming, but light the torches, drink the wine, and gather around the fire. We can still defy it. When Game of Thrones first took the world by storm, it became synonymous with dark and violent storytelling. The show gained a reputation for pulling no punches, killing off beloved characters, including unnecessary sex, and breaking traditional fantasy tropes. In the early seasons, this subversion was praised, but as the series went on, this approach gradually transformed into a celebration of edgy, shocking twists and grimdark, gimmicky storytelling. Before we go any further, let's define two opposite philosophies: Nihilism and Romanticism. Nihilism is the belief that life is meaningless, that morality, hope and love are pointless illusions in a cold, indifferent universe. It embraces despair and resignation. Romanticism, on the other hand, sees beauty in the struggle. It values passion, the intensity of emotions, and the belief that love and hope can transcend even the darkest moments. Romanticism doesn't ignore suffering, but instead argues that beauty and meaning are all more precious because of it. Back to Ramsay's infamous line, sadly it's easy to see why it stuck with fans, especially those introduced to the universe through the show. Game of Thrones, especially in its later seasons, became defined by shock value and plot twists. Often for the sake of shock alone, the focus shifted towards cynical storytelling, moral ambiguity where it wasn't necessary, while also light-washing many of the darker characters in the novels, random decisions and random deaths. By the time final season rolled around, the show's tone had firmly cemented itself as edgelordy grimdark anyway. This is where I'm gonna say confusion, for lack of a better term, between the show and the books comes into play. Many have attributed this label to A Song of Ice and Fire as a whole. Grimdark is a type of fantasy fiction subgenre with characters who behave in ways that are morally bad, and a subject matter that is sad, hopeless or violent. Unlike more uplifting fantasy, Grimdark embraces cynicism and ultraviolence, reflecting a disillusioned view of reality. Adam Roberts described it as fiction where nobody is honorable and might is right. He also noted that Grimdark projects a dark view of our present world rather than reimagining any actual historical reality. Bourke defines it as a retreat into the valorization of darkness for darkness' sake, into a kind of nihilism that portrays right action as either impossible or futile. While Game of Thrones leaned into this aesthetic, A Song of Ice and Fire doesn't truly ally with it. In fantasy and science fiction medievalism, from Isaac Asimov to A Game of Thrones, Helen Young equates Grimdark to gritty fantasy and A Song of Ice and Fire in particular. As did Adam Roberts in Get Started In Writing Science Fiction and Fantasy, I disagree. Θα μου πεις ποιος ερώτησε, θα σου πω στο κανάλι μου είμαι ότι θέλω λέω. I think they fell into the same trap as those who misinterpret Ramsay's quote. They equate the show with the novels. Something very obvious from the parts I could find and read from these two books, since both of them talk about the TV show as much as they do the novels. I don't know if in parts I cannot access they make these differentiations, but the ones I read were kind of mashing the both of them together. Grimdark might describe the show, but not the books. Genevieve Valentine called Grimdark a shorthand for a subgenre of fantasy fiction that claims to trade on the psychology of those sword-holding heroes and the dark realism behind all those kingdom politics. Something that I would consider closer to how George is approaching his story. She also noted that while some writers have embraced the term, others see it as a dismissive term for fantasy that's dismantling tropes, a stamp unfairly applied. And this is how I feel about A Song of Ice and Fire. If we gather all the traits people attribute to the grimdark subgenre, the show fits this criteria far more than the novels ever do. The show often threw dark and brutal shocking curveballs for the sake of subverting expectations, leaving us scratching our heads. 99% of the decisions felt out of character, and shock for the sake of shock moments overrode any sense of narrative payoff. While the TV show could have worked as Grimdark, it ultimately didn't. But even if it had succeeded, there are still massive differences in the themes between the two mediums, and I'm not the only one saying this. Benioff himself once said, "Themes are for 8th grade book reports." That tells us everything we need to know about how removed the TV show was from the novels thematically. To the question, is this really what A Song of Ice and Fire is about, the one that still circulates and divides the fandom, I say no. Martin is not a nihilist, and A Song of Ice and Fire has as many heartwarming and even sappy moments as it does brutal ones. Martin is a former hippie and a romantic at heart. His novels are inspired by both Romanticism and the tradition of chivalric romance. The happy and romanticized storytelling with shiny, perfect characters who never do anything wrong και πάνε με το σταυρό στο χέρι τέλος πάντων, and a happy ending is a fairly recent development, often wrongly attributed to actual medieval stories. In reality, the stories, myths and legends of older eras were much darker and grittier than we give them credit for. From the Iliad and Greek tragedies to the Arthurian legends and even children's fairy tales. These are the type of stories Martin draws inspiration from, in my opinion. These stories were much more grey in comparison to classic modern fantasy inspired by Tolkien, with way more complicated characters. The Romantic movement, which emerged in the late 18th century, was characterized by emotional extremes, the sublime and the tension between darkness and light. Pain, suffering and violence are real and prominent, but so is the potential for beauty, love and redemption. Martin's characters are not perfect and don't fight because they are destined to lose or because they know they will win. They fight because the fight itself matters. Even in the face of impossible odds, hope is still alive. Like the Romantics, Martin uses the word's cruelty to make the moments of happiness and love all more precious. He also draws heavily from medieval chivalric romance, which focused on unattainable ideals, whether of love, honor, or duty. These tales often ended in tragedy, but they were never pointless or hopeless. The quest, the striving for something greater, was the noble part. In A Song of Ice and Fire, characters like Daenerys, Jon, and Brienne embody this. Their goals may look or even be unreachable, but their commitment to justice, loyalty, and love gives them purpose and gives meaning to the story. Brandchild, why do you torment yourself so? One day you may do some of these things, but now you're only a boy of 8. I'd sooner be a wolf. Then I could live in the wood and sleep when I wanted, and I could find Arya and Sansa. I'd smell where they were and go save them, and when Robb went to battle, I'd fight beside him like Greywind. I'd tear out the Kinslayer's throat with my teeth, rip, and then the war would be over, and everyone would come back to Winterfell, if I was a wolf. Ow! When at last she slept, she dreamt of home. The King's Road wound its way past Winterfell on its way to the Wall, and Yoren had promised he'd leave her there with no one any wiser about who she'd been. She yearned to see her mother again, and Robb and Bran and Rickon, but it was Jon Snow she thought of most. She wished somehow they could come to the Wall before Winterfell, so Jon might mass up her hair and call her little sister. She'd tell him I missed you, and he'll say it too at the very same moment, the way they always used to say things together. She would have liked that. She would have liked that better than anything. Your Grace is kind to this one. Missandei slipped under the seats. He was a good brother. Dany wrapped her arms around the girl. Tell me about him. He taught me how to climb a tree when we were little. He could catch fish with his hands. Once I found him sleeping in our garden with 100 butterflies crawling all over him. He looked so beautiful that morning. This one, I loved him. As he loved you. Dany stroked the girl's hair. Say the word, my sweet, and I will send you from this awful place. I will find a ship somewhere and send you home, to Nath. I would sooner stay with you. On Nath I'd be afraid. What if the slavers come again? I feel safe when I'm with you. Safe. The word made Dany's eyes fill up with tears. I want to keep you safe. Missandei was only a child. With her, she felt as she could be a child too. No one ever kept me safe when I was little. Well, Sir Willem did, but then he died, and Viserys... I want to protect you, but it is so hard to be strong. I don't always know what I should do. I must know, though. I am all they have. I am the queen, the... Mother, whispered Missandei. Mother to dragons, Dany shivered. No, mother to us all. Missandei hugged her tighter. Your Grace should sleep. Dawn will be here soon, and Court. We'll both sleep, and dream of sweeter days. Close your eyes. When she did, Dany kissed her eyelids and made her giggle. I would need to steal her if I wanted her love, but she might give me children. I might someday hold a son of my own blood in my arms. A son was something Jon Snow had never dared dream of, since he decided to live his life on the Wall. I could name him Robb. Val would want to keep her sister's son, but we could foster him at Winterfell, and Gilly's boy as well. Sam would never need to tell his lie. We'd find a place for Gilly too, and Sam could come visit her once a year or so. Mance's son and Craster's would grow up brothers, as I once did with Robb. These scenes are as warm as they are sad. They are anything but grimdark. This deep emotional longing is what makes A Song of Ice and Fire so special. Even though the series is filled with darkness, violence and tragedy, it never feels hollow or meaningless as the show often did. George has a unique talent for writing emotions. He makes sure that there is always a feeling of meaning, hope, resilience or warmth, even in the most heart-wrenching scenes, and in the books, every victory, no matter how small, matters. And even when things go extremely wrong, the reader is left with a sense that these moments have meaning. This is why the fans have stayed invested in this universe for so long. They're emotionally invested in character struggles that feel real and relatable. This is the very opposite of nihilism. His characters fight for love, honor, family, freedom, and justice. The universe is the opposite of Sansa's songs, which represents the utopia often seen in classical fantasy and romanticized views of the medieval era. The knights steal, they rape, and they care about everything but honor. But we also have characters like Brienne and Barristan, who do uphold these ideas. He contrasts their ideals against a brutal world. And while they often fail, that failure doesn't mean they're wrong to try or that their try was meaningless. In a truly nihilistic story, Jon Snow wouldn't have cared to unite the wildlings with the Watts because all of them would die. It wouldn't have mattered. Daenerys would not endure all these struggles for the sake of ending one of the worst, if not the worst, institution known to man, because it is practically impossible. And Bran wouldn't have believed in his dreams because humans cannot fly. The beauty of these books lies in the idea that there are countless things worth fighting for, even when victory seems impossible, even when the world is brutal. My own heroes are the dreamers, those men and women who try to make the world a better place than what they found it, whether in small ways or great ones. Some succeeded, some failed, most had mixed results, but it is the effort that's heroic, as I see it. Win or lose, I admire those who fight a good fight. A Song of Ice and Fire, more often than not, is the opposite of nihilism that has been unfairly attributed to the series, mostly because of the TV show, which amplified these beliefs. The show's misinterpretation of Martin's work in the end didn't work because they never grasped the story. I think you need to have some hope. We'll all yearn for happy endings in a sense. Myself, I'm attracted to the bittersweet ending. People ask me how Game of Thrones is gonna end, and I'm not gonna tell them, but I always say to expect something bittersweet in the end. You can just fulfill a quest and then pretend life is perfect. This wasn't the case for the TV show for various reasons, as we now know, but it seems like it will be the case for George's ending. However bittersweet, melancholic, or even tragic the true ending might be, it will never feel as empty as the one delivered by the show. And however cliché might some people find it, all our main 5 characters most likely will have a satisfying ending. 5 central characters will make it through all 3 volumes, growing from children to adults and changing the world and themselves in the process. In a sense, my trilogy is almost a generational saga, telling the life stories of these 5 characters, 3 men and 2 women. The 5 key players are Tyrion Lannister, Daenerys Targaryen, and the 3 of the children of Winterfell, Arya, Bran and the bastard Jon Snow. Even if this part is only from the outline in 1991, which has been mostly scrapped, George Martin said in 2016 that he will be moving toward that ending still. I know the ending in broad strokes, but broad strokes are just broad strokes, and the devil's in the details. As I write these last books, I'll be moving towards the ending that I've known since 1991. But many of the fine details might be moved around and changed. Will they have a perfect ending? No, probably not, but they will have a hopeful one. What I have noticed more and more of late, however, is my gardening is taking me further and further away from the television series. Yes, some of the things you saw on HBO in Game of Thrones, you will also see in The Winds of Winter. Though maybe not in quite the same ways, but much of the rest will be quite different. Don't think what happens in the show will happen in the books. The show is completely different. The books will be nothing like that.